If there was one really under-the-radar program that I was super excited to watch this year, it was Virginia Tech. Everybody remembers when Virginia Tech was really good at football, as under Frank Beamer, they were consistently at the top of the ACC, a tough team to play each and every week, and occasionally they would break into the elite territory of college football. Unfortunately, since Beamer retired, things have really been up and down for him. They had a couple of good years under Justin Fuente, and it so far has been a slow rebuild under Brent Pry. They were awful in their first year, but last season they found their quarterback, found a ton of good receivers, and put together a ton of momentum, making them one of the better teams to finish last season. That's why Virginia Tech football had so much hype going into 2024. They returned pretty much every starter from last year's team, finished the year with a ton of momentum, and many thought that, combined with a weak schedule in the ACC, Virginia Tech could make the college football playoff. Hokies fans were hoping that this was all true and not just media drama, but now as we flash forward to week 1 of the college football season, it looks like it was all hogwater. Virginia Tech football played really conservative, they played extremely scared, and they ended up losing to Vanderbilt in overtime. While this is no jab against the Commodores, Vanderbilt football has not exactly been a juggernaut. They haven't made a bowl game since 2018, and they are considered the laughingstock of Power 5 football. Even though Vanderbilt was at home, the stadium was pretty much full of Virginia Tech fans, and this was absolutely disappointing. Kyron Drones and Virginia Tech got off to a very slow start, and despite being down 17-0, they did find their way back, but sadly, they lost in overtime, and now not only are they 0-1, but they may have lost Kyron Drones for some time. He ended up getting injured, and Colin Schlee would have to play at the end of the game, and I don't really know what's going on with his injury at the moment. In today's video though, I want to give a quick reaction to this Virginia Tech game. We're going to talk about why Virginia Tech had playoff hype going into the season, and how they ultimately ruined their quote-unquote special 2024 campaign right when it was getting started. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about Virginia Tech football. So yeah, Brent Pry was hired to be the next head coach in 2022, and after a bad season, he ended up starting to figure it out in 2023 last year. They would end up turning a corner, as they would get to a bowl game and finish above 500 in the ACC for the first time since 2019. Virginia Tech, though, struggled against the top teams, as they fell to Florida State, Louisville, and NC State by a combined 108-48 margin. Virginia Tech was known for beating up on bad teams, but it didn't really matter. It was year 2, and now expectations and eyes were going to turn to year 3. They had benched quarterback Grant Wells in favor of Baylor transfer Kyron Drones, and they had now found a guy of the future, and someone who could actually do things for them. They finally found their long-term answer, and this is the foundation for any team to have a Cinderella-type season. One 24/7 Sports analyst said, quote, "Virginia Tech is hoping to make a run at the ACC championship game with a lot of returning production on their roster and a favorable schedule. Two of the Hokies' most important games will be a road trip to Miami at the end of September and a home game against Clemson in November. If Virginia Tech wants to get to the ACC championship game, they will likely have to win one or both of those games." Many people predicted Virginia Tech to maybe pull off an upset against Clemson, and that would get them to an 11-1 record, where they would likely rematch with a team like Miami or Florida State, and then hopefully get to the college football playoff. So why is everyone expecting this? Well, after 3 wins in year 1 and 7 in year 2, everyone kind of saw the trajectory of the program and saw that there was enough momentum to maybe take an even bigger step in year 3. Brent Pry has been doing this for quite some time now, and he's seen as one of the better up-and-coming coaches in college football. The receiver room is as strong as it's ever been for Virginia Tech, as they returned Ali Jennings and also had a veteran trio of Daquan Felton, Jalen Lane, and Steven Gosnell. They had combined for 101 catches for 1,500 yards and 17 touchdowns, and all 4 of those guys were going to be back. In terms of the running back department, they only averaged 60 rushing yards per game before Kyron Drones became the starter, and then after that, they averaged 213 yards per game. Combining him with tailback Bayshiel Tootin ended up becoming one of the better running backs in the conference, running for 863 yards and 10 touchdowns after transferring in from NC-A&T. So yeah, they had a good coach, they had momentum, they had a quarterback, and they had a good plethora of receivers and running backs. On the defensive side of the ball, the running game absolutely destroyed the Hokies defense, but eventually they finished the year ranked top 20 nationally for the first time since 2017. They're also extremely strong in pass coverage, as they returned both Dorian Strong and Mansour Delane and formed one of the best corner duos in the ACC. Everything was set up for them. They were expected to be a dark horse for the college football playoff, and the question was now whether they could handle the preseason hype. Brent Pry said, quote, "I want those expectations. I understand those standards, and people talk about how to handle those expectations. We all know that has nothing to do with the team that we can be when we go to Nashville. But at the same time, we all came to Virginia Tech because of those expectations. This is a place where you should expect to compete for the playoffs and expect to compete for a championship. That's who Tech is." So yeah, they're now going to go into week 1 against Vanderbilt, who was a perennial bottom feeder in the SEC. They are under head coach Clark Lee, and after losing a couple of big names to the portal, they brought in quarterback Diego Pavia from Mexico State. He would beat out Utah transfer Nate Johnson for that starting gig, and little did anyone know how many problems Pavia would cause for this defense tonight. He's a guy who wants to win and has been underrated his whole life. That was ultimately the deciding factor in today's game, and why Virginia Tech's special season is over really before it started. Virginia Tech ended up getting off to a slow start, and Vanderbilt got the first points on the board. Brock Taylor hit a 43-yard field goal, and it was 3-0 at the end of the first quarter. In the second quarter, though, Diego Pavia and Vanderbilt started to get even better, as Diego found Quincy Skinner Jr. for a 14-yard touchdown pass to the right side of the end zone, and then a couple of minutes later, the running back Cedric Alexander and their powerful offensive line would power down the field and score another touchdown. It was now 17-0, and Virginia Tech had no idea what they were doing. They looked lost. Drones was making a ton of bad decisions, and Vanderbilt was getting a ton of pressure. Luckily, before the half ended, though, they got a 40-yard field goal, and that would stop the bleeding, getting them on the board. It was 17-3, and then in the third quarter, Baishil Tootin ended up having his first touchdown of the game, giving Virginia Tech some dire needed momentum. After that, Vanderbilt would have a weird sequence in which they would miss a field goal, had a penalty, then ended up punting, had another penalty, and then kicked a field goal. This was from 53 yards and gave them a 20-10 lead. After that, John Love would hit a 38-yard field goal for Virginia Tech, and they would go into the fourth quarter trailing by 7. Luckily, though, for Virginia Tech, it looked like they were going to pull this one out. Tootin had another touchdown, this time out of the backfield, and the Hokies would tie the game up at 20-20. After that, Virginia Tech would once again get the ball back again, and with 4 minutes to go, Allie Jennings would have a 62-yard touchdown pass on broken coverage, and Virginia Tech took a 27-20 lead, giving them probably enough momentum to win. Vanderbilt looked a little bit lost at this point, and Virginia Tech was obviously the better team, and they were to come away from Nashville with a victory. Except, Diego Pavia got punched in the mouth and decided to fight back. Eventually, he found Cedric Alexander for his second touchdown of the night with an 8-yard pass, and with a minute and 51 seconds to go, they would end up tying the game up at 27. After Virginia Tech would get nothing going on their last drive, Vanderbilt went down the field and had a chance to win. They had a field goal attempt, and unfortunately, Taylor's field goal would go a little bit wide right, and they'd have to go to overtime. Once overtime ended up happening, Diego Pavia would have a 4-yard touchdown run, and now it was time for Virginia Tech to fight back and tie it up again. Except they'd be doing it without their star quarterback. Kyron Drones had suffered some sort of non-contact injury, and he would not be able to play in overtime. Their backup quarterback was a guy by the name of Colin Schlee, and he actually spent a couple of years starting for Kent State and ended up going to UCLA in 2023 and battled it out with Dante Moore and Ethan Garbers. He ended up losing the job, and I actually thought he went off to the NFL or just went off to the real world, but I guess he was on the staff for Virginia Tech and ended up deciding to play this year. It was up to him to finish the job, and while he had been in plenty of moments like this before, there was too much pressure here and he probably wasn't prepared as he sailed the ball out of the back of the end zone. What's interesting though is the Vanderbilt player absolutely killed the Virginia Tech wide receiver in the head, and honestly there should have been a targeting penalty. I didn't know if the referees didn't see it, or maybe it wasn't as hard of a hit as I thought, but my initial reaction was that this guy's head almost got blown off, and that there was no reason why there shouldn't have been a flag. But it didn't matter as the ball sailed out the back of the end zone, and Vanderbilt won 34-27. This was the first major upset of the 2024 college football season, and as the Commodores were a 13.5-point underdog, they found a way to make it happen. So what were some takeaways from this game? Well, Virginia Tech got punched in the mouth after getting blanked 17-0 and fought back and honestly should have won. If their defense could have stepped up and made one more stop in the fourth quarter, they would have survived that game and no one would really care. Of course, sometimes teams struggle in week 1, but they did let it happen and they ended up losing, which is absolutely terrible. In terms of the Virginia Tech offense, Kyron Drones at times looked scared, was forcing throws, and overall the play calling was very vanilla. They couldn't really find a ton of success in the run game, and most of Tech's big plays were on blown defensive schemes from Vanderbilt. A new game plan is definitely going to be needed for their bigger opponents, and Brent Pry was way too conservative in this game. As I said, Kyron Drones looked a little bit out of it as he made some bad decisions and did a lot of scrambling that didn't have much success. The offensive line was the biggest question mark of the team, and they really need to improve in all aspects. Whether it was discipline, run blocking, or a clean pocket for Drones, they just need to get better. Honestly, my biggest takeaway from this is that Virginia Tech might have bought into their own hype too much. They thought they were better than they were, they expected to come out of this game pretty easily, and they also underestimated Vanderbilt. I'm not saying Vanderbilt's going to win 10 games this year, and I don't even know if they're going to make a bowl game at all, but it looks like Vandy came to play, and they were super tough, and they have a quarterback who wants to win, and a guy who was extremely doubted. Diego Pavia was a guy who went into Jordan-Hare Stadium and beat Auburn last year, so he was not going to be fazed by this Virginia Tech team. Still though, Virginia Tech has a shot at a decent season. They'll play Marshall, Old Dominion, and Rutgers in the next 3 games, and honestly they should win all 3 of those and be 3-1 for a game against Miami. Miami looks really good so far, so this still could be a really fun game and a really important one, and if Virginia Tech could find a way to win this, no one would care about that Vanderbilt loss. After that, they have Stanford, Boston College, Georgia Tech, Syracuse, and then Clemson. Honestly, they should be able to win 4 of those 5 games, and I also think they'll easily beat Duke and Virginia. Virginia Tech still could win 11 games this year, but honestly, after this Week 1 loss to Vanderbilt, I'm going to say they end up going 9-3. I still believe a lot in this team, as they have a ton of experience, and ultimately they got humbled. We'll have to wait and see, but sadly, Virginia Tech's supposed special 2024 season could be off to a bumpy start, and this was honestly embarrassing losing to Vanderbilt in that way. We'll have to wait and see what happens though, but what do you guys think? If you're a Virginia Tech fan, what the heck went wrong today, and how do you think the season's going to end? Also, if you have another topic you want me to cover for this season and from Week 1 of college football, be sure to drop it down below, leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all of the videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.